Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I know this video is going to make a lot of people angry, and I feel like that's why I have to make it regardless. I know it's going to make a lot of people angry because the bears are going to hate the fact that I have Bitcoin going to about 50,000 by the time we get the BlackRock ETF launch and the halving, but bulls are also going to hate it because I expect a huge sell-off after the halving and after the BlackRock ETF goes live as this economy falls into recession, and bulls are not going to want to hear that. And then bears are going to be mad at me once again because I do think this recession will be short-lived and the money printer will come out in full force and we will go on into a bull market in 2025 and a major blow off top when the Fed has to throw the kitchen sink at the economy to save us from the recession they created. And I know a lot of you aren't going to want to hear this. You have your preconceived biases on what you expect, but just hear out my arguments and I give you full permission to roast me and tell me how wrong I am in the comments section once you actually hear me out. But I think that once you hear the arguments of why I think this is by far, bar none, the most likely scenario for Bitcoin over the next 12 months, I think that you'll have a similar view to me once you hear out my arguments as to why this is my base case and the most likely trajectory for Bitcoin over the next 12 months. So let's start by making the bears upset, which I've been a bear myself, especially in the more 6 to 12 month time frame because of my recession concerns. But in the short term, over the next 6 months or so, why do I expect this up move and why do I think it's very obvious? For one, we have a breakout after a 1.5 year accumulation range. And when you get out of a huge range and people accumulated for months and months and months, they didn't accumulate and hodl through this entire period to sell their Bitcoin for a 10-15% gain. These strong hands that held through the 3AC debacle, Luna, FTX collapse, and managed the banking crisis and managed to continue to hold on, they're expecting way higher prices and they're not letting go of their coins until the market is significantly higher. And that's the fuel of the fire of what I think could send us significantly higher in the short term as that lack of liquidity starts to scramble and try to get a position going into the halving and going into the BlackRock ETF launch. And I think that fuel is going to send us significantly higher in the short term as people try to get their position because they've been sidelined throughout this accumulation period because of their more broader macro and recession concerns. But the FOMO of this move will be incredible in my opinion. And another reason why I think we can go a lot higher in the short term is I'm not seeing the FOMO and euphoria that I would expect for a major local high for Bitcoin. Sentiment is still conservative. There's still a lot of recession concerns, a lot of macro concerns, a lot of people who are waiting to buy significantly lower, and maybe they will get those prices one day, but I do not expect them to get those prices in the short term. And I think the FOMO and euphoria will get insane once Bitcoin gets back above this $36,000 level and starts to rally here, because right now everybody is very comfortable and complacent in the disbelief stage of believing that this is just a trap and we're going to sell off immediately because of recession and all those other concerns that can take way longer to play out. And of course, the famous quote, the market can remain irrational longer than one can remain solvent. And after so much accumulation and such a strong breakout, everybody is complacent, waiting to buy lower, even if they believe in Bitcoin long term, even if they're bullish long term. And I think some big green candles and some aggressive price action to the upside will actually bring us the euphoria, the FOMO, the sentiment that would result in this major peak up here once everybody front runs the BlackRock launch, the halving. It's all over mainstream media. It's all over Twitter. Everybody's talking about BlackRock and the halving and the perfect setup for Bitcoin. And that's what causes the FOMO rally and everybody just throwing their cash from the sidelines in because they don't want to miss out on the major move and the best opportunity ever, which is how mainstream media is going to pitch it right into that launch. And not to mention, now that BlackRock is in the picture, I wouldn't be surprised if they had the ability to pump whatever narratives they wanted for their ETF and go on CNBC and all these platforms talking about how Bitcoin is going to be the recession savior, it's the inflation hedge, it's the risk off asset, and pitch that to retail investors all the way up to the big release of their ETF and the Bitcoin halving. And finally, and maybe most importantly, the macro picture. We always talk about liquidity and macro concerns on this channel, but we have to keep in mind that as of right now, rate cuts are not expected until May, and nothing very serious has broken in the economy quite yet, forcing the Fed's hand. And that's why we're in this Goldilocks zone where we could rally higher. If we go ahead and throw the Fed interest rate on here, we can see that in 2019, once the Fed paused its rate hikes, Bitcoin had this incredible move from 3,000 to 14,000. But once things started breaking and the Fed started cutting rates, that's what finally sent Bitcoin lower and actually caused the top of the market. And what situation do we find ourselves in now? We have the Fed pausing rate hikes. Everybody's celebrating that maybe we're going to have the soft landing after all. Nothing crazy has broken quite yet, even though there's been plenty of cracks in the system, and we are seeing the data slowly get worse and worse. But we haven't had the huge collapse or the huge unemployment rate spike that will send everything crashing and force the Fed to cut rates immediately. As of right now, things are getting concerning, of course, slowly but surely, but we don't have that big panic event and that huge crash or issue that will force the market to panic and force the Fed's hand. And I don't expect that to happen until early 2024. We will see data deteriorate. I mean, look at the unemployment rate taken up here. Look at the non-farm payrolls in a very, very clear downtrend over the past year or so. And of course, this is an amazing chart here shared on Twitter by Dylan LeClaire. This is the unemployment rate 2-year moving average. And whenever we get above that 2-year moving average in the unemployment rate, it's always resulted in a recession historically. However, just because we know there will be a recession doesn't mean it's starting tomorrow, and it doesn't mean things are going to break tomorrow, which is why I think we have this window here in the short term for narratives to pick up, for everybody to celebrate the Fed being done with rate hikes and front running rate cuts, and knowing that markets are forward looking and will probably front run when the Fed actually cuts rates. And that gives us immense fuel to the fire to send us higher in the short term, my opinion, get all the bears off the sidelines, get everybody on board, cause a ton of FOMO and people not wanting to miss out. And then once we have that high going into the halving and the BlackRock launch, then we get the major sell-off. All right, and now that the bears are sufficiently mad at me, let's go ahead and do the same for the bulls. Let's go ahead and clear up this chart a little bit. So the reason for this portion of my drawing and why I think the BlackRock ETF will lead to a huge sell-off is because people aren't going to sit on the sidelines if they're bullish Bitcoin and wait so they can buy the BlackRock ETF. Everybody who knew about the BlackRock ETF has been accumulating here. They're going to buy leading all the way up to the launch, and the closer we get to the launch and the more likely it gets, and especially once it gets approved. I don't know how long of a gap there will be between approval and it actually going live, but once the approval happens, I think Bitcoin could go vertical leading into that launch, as everybody wants to get their coins before the launch. And once the launch actually goes live, no matter what, big actors and market makers are going to sell the news, and sentiment and narrative traders are going to sell all the positions they gathered over here when they were buying the rumor all the way up. You will have peak euphoria at the top, and all the smart money will sell the news, knowing that recession is knocking on the door by that point. I mean, we're expecting rate cuts as of right now in May. And no matter what anybody tells you, the bond market is the best information we have in terms of when things are going to get ugly, when things are going to break, when the Fed is going to cut rates. This is trillions of dollars of money on the line betting on these bond futures. And right now, the consensus is rate cuts, which in my opinion means major recession and crash is expected for May 2024, maybe even March. We have monitored it getting closer and closer. But as of right now, we'll say between March and May, which is why I have April, which is also conveniently the halving marked out over here. It'll be the perfect euphoria peak that everybody who manages their emotions will be able to sell into. And finally, once the BlackRock ETF is live and the halving is behind us, I expect the recession to get very ugly and start to set in, which will be additional fuel to the fire for the sell-off. Now, this is just a rough drawing. It could go lower than here. It could end a little bit higher, even though I don't think that's likely. And once that recession actually occurs, the same recession that people have been talking about this entire time and staying sidelined, waiting for it this entire time, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them are forced to FOMO in over here. Now that recession is actually going to occur. It could be 6 months of pain. It could be 9 months of pain. It could be 12, 16. No way to know this far out, but I expect risk assets to go significantly lower during that recession and for a lot of people to be forced to sell their positions, maybe because they have to cover cost of living or maybe because unfortunately they get laid off. And then whenever we do end up finding that bottom and the Fed has to go crazy with the money printer to put out the fire they started, that's when we go on the major bull market in 2025 or whenever. Because no matter what, we're bullish on Bitcoin long term because we know the money printer is inevitable and that all this pain they're inducing on the economy is going to have to get reversed at some point with the money printer, and we will have an insane bull market again at some point in 2025 or maybe even late 2024. But anyway, that's why that's my base case. And you also have other things agreeing with this, like what we've seen with the indices as of right now. Now that the Fed has paused and things haven't broken quite yet, we see a huge bounce off support for the S&P 500. And those of you that have been watching this channel for a while know what I'm going to say. A major reclaim of this support level, you fall below it, you close back above it. Normally a very bullish sign of reversal. Same thing on the NASDAQ. We had this descending triangle for months, break down below it, bounce off support, major reclaim. And it's hard not to be bullish in the short term when you have the Fed paused, you have major reclaims on indices, and you have the dollar index breaking back into its old range. Now, of course, we're going to need some more information. One close is not enough. I wouldn't be surprised if the dollar spent some time consolidating here before deciding if it wants to break back down or if it's going to take off higher. But as of right now, the dollar falling back into its previous range and causing a deviation, which I always talk about as well. I always look for reclaims and deviations of major ranges because they do tend to be huge reversal points. We have a deviation on the dollar. We have a major bullish reclaim on the indices as Bitcoin is consolidating below resistance. And that's why I think it's incredibly likely that the narratives pick up. Everything looks fine. It looks like the Fed pulled off a miracle with the soft landing. Risk assets take off higher, and then the recession actually sets in. The pain actually sets in. Risk assets go a lot lower, and then we're going to have to traverse those hard times then once we actually get to them. But as of right now, that's why this is my base case. Let me know why you think I'm wrong. Let me know if you agree after listening to this video and hearing my arguments. But when I look at sentiment right now, I see a lot of disbelief and complacency. Of course, there's people that bought here that are celebrating a little bit, but I don't see that mainstream narrative, FOMO narratives being thrown into your face like BlackRock ETF and halving that I would expect at a major local top. And you also have the confluence of the 618 Fibonacci retracement, which Bitcoin loves to test in halving and pre-halving years before going on to its next major bull market rally. So the confluence of all those things is why this is my base case. And of course, we're going to monitor it forward. And this wasn't my base case up until maybe a couple of weeks ago because I didn't think Bitcoin could reclaim and break above this range. But now that it has, we have to face the facts as they are and acknowledge the fact that now that Bitcoin is above 32,000, bears don't really have an argument in the short term as long as we're above that level because it is a year-long accumulation breakout, and those normally go a lot higher before finally putting in their peak and reversing. But anyway, let me know what you expect. Of course, we're going to have to see next week's price action to see if the NASDAQ and S&P 500 can hold on to these reclaims and if the dollar can stay below the 105 level. It would also be great to see Bitcoin either consolidate some more in this range or finally have a breakout. I expect a lot of shakeouts and panicking along the way, but the market knows that we will have the money printer again at some point. and I expect it to front run that fact, even if there's going to be pain along the way in the short term. But anyway, what do you think is the most likely scenario? Do you think there's any validity or truth to this? Would love to get your guys' input. And for those of you that made it to the end of the video, I would love to ask you guys a question, since you guys are the real ones that made it this far into the video. I'm thinking about making a free Discord where we can have these discussions a lot more often, and maybe in a much more two-way format, instead of me just putting my thoughts out there and you guys only being able to reply in the comments. So let me know what you guys would think about a Discord. Is it something that interests you? Do you think there would be any value in making one? Because I've been considering doing it for a long time, and I think that, it makes sense just to have a place that we could have these discussions and talk about these things as they're happening, instead of me doing a video every couple of days or so. I think it would be fun to have a free Discord where we could have these discussions. But anyway, let me know what you expect. Thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.